Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where October 2022 is coming to an end. It's almost over. Halloween is tomorrow. Another month gone. Hard to believe, but yeah, October, it's over. So what did I read during October? I read a few things in October. I even finished a few things in October. So let's talk about it. What did I read here at the Manor in October? So the first thing I finished was the big book of The Continental Op by Dashiell Hammett. And I already talked about this. I did a whole video on it. I'll try to remember to link it down below just in case you're interested. But this was an excellent book. I really loved it. This is every Continental Op story and the two novels of The Continental Op that Dashiell Hammett wrote. The original magazine versions from Black Mask of those novels. And it's fantastic. Continental Op, Dashiell Hammett's first great detective hero. And it was a great book. Great reading experience. I loved every page. And there were a lot of pages in this book, and they were full of text, double columned. This is bigger than it looks, this book. So yeah, I finished it though. Fantastic. Fantastic book. So that's the first thing I want to mention because it was the first thing I finished this month. Now, throughout the month, of course, I have been reading Varney the Vampire, which I'll talk about more tomorrow on my Halloween Varney the Vampire special. Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood. So this was a penny dreadful that came out in Victorian England. Every week a new pamphlet, 18 to 20 pages I believe, would come out of the continuing adventures of Varney the Vampire. And it went on for a long time because there's a lot of Varney. I am probably going to be reading this for a while. I'm only about a quarter through Varney the Vampire, which means I finished chapter 40 out of 200 and something chapters. But what I've read from Varney so far has been tremendously entertaining. I've had a really good time with this. I've really enjoyed it. I was worried going into Varney that it would just be terrible. And indeed, the prose is very purple. This is not going to win any literature prizes, Varney the Vampire. It never has and never will. But very entertaining and an important early vampire story, actually. And I will talk all about it tomorrow, along with Roger, on our Varney the Vampire Halloween special. But yeah, I've been reading this throughout the month, and I'll probably be reading this for a while. Very, very episodic. Well, it's not a novel. It's more like the Victorian version of a long-running television show. It's interesting. So Varney the Vampire, I've been reading that. Now, as far as books that I've actually finished, here's one. This is The Long Winter by John Christopher. Now, this was supposed to be the first book for me to read during New World's November. The first week's theme is terrestrial, stories that take place on the planet Earth, which this does. So this was supposed to be the first thing I read for New World's November, but you know, I picked it up, you know, I read the first page, I read the second page, read the third page, just kept reading it because it was really good. So I read the whole thing, and it was excellent. I highly recommend The Long Winter, also known as The World in Winter. I believe that's the title, The World in Winter. I think that's how you can get it now. But for the American edition, back in the olden days, it was The Long Winter by John Christopher. John Christopher, who likes to destroy the world in his books in one way or another. He is the author of The Death of Grass, which was a great science fiction novel. This one is not as good as The Death of Grass, although there are some really great parts in this book. And overall, it's really interesting about a new ice age that creeps and takes over creeps into and takes over Europe and America and makes everything really, really cold and all but unlivable. And so people can't stay there anymore, and a lot of people immigrate to the warmer countries in Africa and South America and places like that. And so, like in this story, Africa is doing really well, and Africans are all, or a lot of Africans are really wealthy now, and the Europeans are, the immigrants were fighting for menial jobs. It's an interesting book, and it's just some great parts in this book. The ending was a little odd. It felt like a Hollywood ending. Like if they made a movie off of this book, that would be the ending that you'd see in the movie. And it just didn't seem to fit, really. Although I found out later that there was more than one ending. There was more than one ending written for this book. So I'm not sure why John Christopher chose the ending that he did for this. Maybe the alternate ending would be better, who knows? But as it stands, I recommend it. It's a really interesting science fiction novel from John Christopher, The Long Winter or The World in Winter. So that was cool. I also read another really, really fun book. This was Out Among the Ice Beacons by Gareth Howells, who is probably better known to many of you as the star of the YouTube channel, Books, Songs, and Other Magic. Very talented man, Gareth Howells. Great channel. I'll try to remember to link it down below. So this is his, I think this was his first novel, Out Among the Ice Beacons by Gareth Howells. Science fiction novel, really entertaining science fiction novel with some really interesting ideas in it about these three teenagers who are transported to another world through an invention that was created by the father of one of these kids. And the world they're transported to is really interesting. This has some really interesting ideas in it. It's fast-paced, really cool book. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I guess, you know, it's not perfect. Nothing is. I'm going to do a full video on this, I think. Some of the imperfections in this could have been smoothed out if it had had a professional editor, but it's a self-published book, so it didn't, I'm assuming. But it was really entertaining. I'm reading, every month I'm reading now a book by a booktuber, and this is the second month I've done that, and both months I've done really well. This is another really entertaining book. So Out Among the Ice Beacons by Gareth Howells, another book that I recommend. So that was fun. So there are some other things that I read this month. I read the September 1950 issue of Fantastic Adventures. I've had this beat up, falling apart pulp for a while now. My good friend Justin picked it up for me, but I hadn't read it. So I read it. So Fantastic Adventures, with the story Warrior Queen of Mars by Alexander Blade. This was really cool, and it had some interesting stuff in it. One of the interesting things was a Fritz Leiber story. The ship sails at midnight, and look at some of that. It just, these old pulps, and this one isn't even that old. This is from 1950, which is towards the end of the pulp era. But they just had some great artwork to go along with the stories, and a lot of this pulp artwork is just lost now. This was an entertaining story. There was some entertaining stuff in this book. Speaking of interesting artwork, this was The Last Bounce by William Tenn. So there was some cool stuff in this old pulp from 1950, which is crumbling into pieces, but you know, I read it. It was a lot of fun. So Fantastic Adventures from September 1950. I'll have to see if I can find any more of these out there somewhere. Also, for my Read Every Book by Stephen King project, I've got a project where I'm reading every book by Stephen King. In the last couple months, I haven't had much of a chance to do that, But I did read this. This is Creepshow by Stephen King and by Bernie Wrightson. So this is the comic book version of the film Creepshow, which Stephen King did the screenplay for. And so he also wrote the comic book version of it, which is this. And it has art by Bernie Wrightson, who is one of the greatest horror artists of all time. Look at that. He's great, Bernie Wrightson is. And he did an excellent job on this comic. Yeah, so I read this when I was a kid, long before I ever had the chance to see the movie. I don't believe I saw the movie in the theater. I think I saw it on VHS when it came out in videotape. But I read the comic over and over again when I was a kid. And the comic is really, really good by Stephen King. So this was fun, Creepshow by Stephen King. I should do a video on this because I've done a video on all the other Stephen King books that I've read. I already did a video on this next one, which was Fantastic Four, Full Circle, with artwork by Alex Ross. This is just an amazing book with brilliant artwork in it. I talked all about this already, but it's pretty cool. Alex Ross, The Fantastic Four, which made me want to read more Fantastic Four, so I'm rereading now Fantastic Four. I'm rereading the Fantastic Four Omnibus Volume 1, and it's wonderful, of course. Fantastic Four is my favorite Marvel comic book of all time. I've actually got a new project that I'm doing that I'll talk about for Marvel Comics that I'll be reading, and so I'll talk about that. It's silly, but you know, so am I. And this was a lot of fun. So this is the last thing I guess I have to talk about today because I'm not finished with it yet. I will finish it though because I love the Fantastic Four. And yeah, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, excellent stuff. I think that's everything. I think that's everything I read this month. I would have read more, but I was really, really busy this month. There was a lot of stuff that happened this month. A lot of stuff happened. I'm hoping that next month is quieter and goes smooth and everything's cool. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay, guys. I will catch you next time. Halloween special.